Hello everyone, this is a strategy gamer back again for another video. Today we're covering tanks, and tanks have been reworked significantly since the last update in No Step Back. So let's start with some very quick fundamentals. Tank designers. So this is really important to do, and I'm just going to preface this with don't copy these templates. This is just what the game gives you at the 1939 start date. I'm just going to cover the basics. Again, a lot of this game is learning about it by playing it. So let's start with the light tank. So actually, let's start the research. So there's three different types of tanks. There's the light tank, the medium tank, and the heavy tank. And later in the game, there's super heavies, but if you're using super heavies, you should have won the game at that point. So light tanks. Light tanks have base stats that are not great in general. They have very light armor, which is an armor, score of 10. They usually have higher max speeds. They have some pretty good breakthrough, but defense isn't great. But most importantly, they have a low production cost. So if you're trying to get out just a ton of really crappy tanks, just to say you have a tank army, light tanks is definitely the way to go. Then we got medium tanks, and medium tanks have more armor. You'll notice it went from 10 to 35. It has a bit more of a breakthrough, but their armor cost is, God, what is that? At least 50% higher base than the light tanks, and so they are more expensive to produce. Lastly, we have the heavy tank, and this is something like 6 times more than the light tank. But their armor initially is the same as medium tanks, but they have more breakthrough, and later on they have better armor in general across the board. And these, you need less of these per division, but they are so expensive, and I rarely, if ever, use heavy tanks. Usually I go with light and medium tanks, where I have light tanks as like throwaway light tanks, and then medium tanks as like the fist of my army. This is what's going to punch through their defenses. If you're facing online, which I don't play online much, so a lot of my advice is for playing solo. Heavy tanks may be better to push through really bad defensive, like really strong defensive lines that have a lot of AT. I'll cover why armor and all that's important in a sec. But so essentially, light tanks are like, hey, we're going to exploit gaps in their line. We're going to drive deep into the enemy, and we're going to, throw a lot of these at them. Medium tanks are a very concentrated fist to push through the enemy defense. And then heavy tanks, if you ever use them, are like a grinding, hey, you can't stop us tank. There's also amphibious tanks, which are used for, amphibious invasions, but unless you're playing like United States or maybe the UK, and then if you're having an interesting playthrough Japan, otherwise you probably won't use many amphibious tanks. So let's look at what you can do to tanks and how you can customize them. So let's open this up, and you'll notice there's a whole lot of slots here. There's no perfect tank. It's all about what you want the tank to do, right? So the way this tank currently works is that it has some pretty good piercing. It can pierce well above its own armor class. So this thing could go toe-to-toe with a medium tank, most likely at this point in the game, and have some success against it. And that's awesome. I'm a big fan of using light tanks in lieu of anti-tank, and just trusting them to go toe-to-toe with the enemy tanks. You can also do stuff that like change the amount of turrets, which increase the costs or decreases depending on how you want to do it. I very, very rarely use superstructure, so I'm sure there's a usage for them, but I barely use them. For the most part, I go with 2 to 3 man turrets, and that's just the big difference is a 1 man turret has the least amount of breakthrough but costs the least. The 2 man turret has a solid amount of breakthrough and costs a little bit more, and then a 3 man turret has a bit more breakthrough, a little bit lower speed, but the highest production cost. Then you have the main armament, and this is how you customize the role of the tank, essentially. So the ones that don't have these things here are just normal tanks, and you can choose how you want to do it. There's Automatic Cannon, which is my personal favorite, just because it does a lot of soft attack, which when you're facing against AI, soft attack is everything, because most of the AI is going to be very soft divisions. By that I mean infantry or truck based. Heavy machine gun is alright. I barely see a use of it though. Small cann's pretty good too. And then an improved small can is always better. It costs double as much, but it's just so much better. Then you have which basic high velocity cannon, which is used to, for more often than not, pierce the enemy tanks to make sure you can go toe to toe with them. Close support gun, which is exceptional soft attack, but very little piercing. And then basic anti-air gun, which is used to take down enemy air. And the enemy air force is so much bigger than yours. This is unbelievably helpful. You also can put in special modules, such as extra things there, which is like additional machine guns, sloped armor, which is outstanding. This is so nice. Wet storage ammunition, which is really good if your reliability gets too low. And I haven't covered reliability yet, so very briefly, this is actually a pretty good description of it. It's just the chance that your thing explodes for no reason. It just doesn't work. Higher reliability means that you're more likely to recover things after a battle, keep it working as you're moving across territory, things like that. And when that gets pretty low, you'll just notice that a lot of your divisions start bleeding tanks. Smoke launchers I barely use, extra storage ammunition I barely use. It's really sloped armor and weapon ammunition early on. There's also secondary turrets, which I also barely ever use. They just add production value without really giving much to you. And finally, radios. And radios are absolutely essential. They are a percentage increase to your stats. And so if you have high base stats and you throw a radio in, that's just such a massive boost. And so radios are very important. And then the rest of these, you can put other things on there, not very important. For the most part, I don't think you want to use all of these because that just increases the cost of your tanks by way too much. All right, down here we got suspension, and there's essentially two types of suspension, tracked and non-tracked. Tracked suspension, for the most part, gives various bonuses, and you can kind of pick and choose what you want depending on where your stats are. And non-tracked suspension, which is only this, and I'm not a fan of it personally. Then we got types of armor, where you have cast armor, which is very nice, but comes at a heavy production cost. Riveted armor, which is not as nice, but less of a production cost. And welded armor, which actually is really nice and is my personal favorite. Then finally, you have the engine, and there's three different types of engines: gasoline, diesel, and petrol electric. Gasoline gives you better max speed, but uses, actually they all use the same amount of fuel. Diesel engine gives you higher reliability, and then petrol electric engine gives you some big percentage increased stats again, but it comes at a massive reliability cost. So if you're going to use that, you're going to need to find a way to increase that reliability with other portions of the tank. And then you can customize the engine and the armor. And each time you customize the engine, it increases the cost, lowers reliability, but improves your max speed. And speed's important, especially if you're trying to do like deep encirclements, where you break through the enemy lines, their troops are retreating, you just want to get deep behind them, deorg them, go after their supply. That's what speed is really good for. Armor is pretty self-explanatory, although if you've never played with tanks or understand what armor does, it's essentially a check. Every infantry division, let me pull that up. All right, so every infantry division has a piercing, and piercing goes against armor. It's just simply a value check, right? If you have higher piercing than armor, the tank is not considered armored anymore because your division can shoot right through it. If your tank has more armor than they have piercing, you will take half of the organization damage that you normally would have and deal twice as much damage to the other division. And so having a higher armor than their piercing is such a massive buff to tanks. But keep in mind, it only needs to be 0.1 above what their piercing is. That being said, you shouldn't just plan it like, oh, I only need the minimum amount of armor, because even AI over time can improve their division's piercing. So it's important to plan ahead and think about where countries' research should be, what the division templates will look like at that point you're playing at. But if you're going to run tanks, with the exception maybe being light tanks, if you're trying to go for just absolute crap tanks, but they're just, tens of thousands of them out there, it's a little bit less important. But if you're having, especially like medium tanks, you want that armor value above piercing without a doubt. That will just make them so much more effective. And so tanks are, in general, used for offensive purposes. You can definitely use them defensively against other tanks or, to slow the enemy down. But one thing about them that's really important to note, and let's see if I can do both. Nope. Okay. Let's check this one. Yeah, this one's a bit better. So, you'll notice that there's a stat, HP, and organization. And these are both going to be lower than a soft infantry division, right? Look at that. Huge difference. So we have 227.2 HP and 63.1 organization against 87 HP and 38.6 organization. So about half the organization, about a third of the HP. HP is important because when your division fights, it's going to burn through things, whether it be manpower or equipment or whatever, and all of that adds into what HP is. But especially when fighting against close air support, which specializes in damaging org and raw infantry strength, close air support is just devastating to tank divisions. And so, especially when attacking with tank divisions, you want to make sure you have that either 50% air support or higher. Just for this attack, let's just get these guys out there. This isn't optimized by any means, so don't copy this exactly. But let's just get our tanks rolling out there so you guys can see. Let's give it a few hours to let the air take back control. Yep, there we go. All right, we have 65. It's probably going to settle around 70%. That's pretty good. So these guys don't have attack plans, so let's get that out there. Nope, that's the wrong division. All right. So I'll let these guys get a little bit of planning bonus, which, I can just use that. Sweet. If you guys have not been introduced to these down here yet, very briefly, force attack is essentially a large buff to your division's attack. But while they're attacking, they will not retreat as long as this is active, but they will take massive more strength damage. So this is great if you're trying to finish off or take a key choke point, but if you put everyone on this all the time, you're going to watch manpower and equipment just tank. Last stand is the same thing, but on defense. Can't retreat while on defense, but you're going to take more strength damage taken. But it gives you 20% bonus to defense, 25% bonus to entrenchment, and then staff office plan just essentially speeds up the planning speed, which is this thing here. So watch as we go through this. It's going up by, holy crap, 12% a day. That's great. All right, they're ready. Let's wait till it's daytime because nighttime gives you a pretty solid debuff. All right. They're ready, so let's watch how quickly these guys here are able to just wipe out just those two divisions there. One at half strength, one at full strength. Alright. Open up the battle. We're seeing that we're fighting on plains. And plains, for the most part, are exactly where tanks should fight. Do not fight tanks in mountains. Tanks do not do well in mountains. Forests are a bit better, but really attacking a plain with no river to worry about, tanks do their best work. And so if you guys remember from my previous video, there's soft attack, hard attack, and breakthrough on offense, while there's soft attack, hard attack, and defense on defense. So they have some pretty good soft attack values, a lot of hard attack, honestly a lot more than I think they should have, and then breakthrough, and that is an outstanding breakthrough stat. That is going to punch through everyone while taking minimal damage. You also see this little shield here. This is telling you that that these tanks are not being pierced by the enemy, so they get their bonuses. So if you read this here, we take 50% less organization damage and take 50% less strength damage. That's new. And then we reduce their organization by an additional 50%. So we are just going to wipe this division out. So it's we started this an hour ago at 9 o'clock on the 10th of September. And let's see how quickly they push through. And just look at those stats just dropping. Orgs go down by about 2 an hour. It's a little bit slow, but it's not the end of the world. And they're gone. And now there's one division left. And they're gone. Alright, so now the tanks are moving in, and I want to exploit this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send these 2 divisions up and around this way. These 2 divisions will go up that way. These 3 divisions will go up that way. And these tank divisions will go up towards Patak. And if I pronounce that, I'm just sorry. Again, I'm deeply American. One thing to keep in mind when using tanks, though, is make sure that when you're exploiting a breakthrough, you got people moving behind them to secure the lines. Because the worst thing you want to do is have a deep drive into enemy territory, and then they immediately counterattack before you have enough divisions there, cut off your divisions, and suddenly the most expensive divisions in your entire army are cut off, encircled, and you have an absolute crisis on your hand. Now you'll notice, already going past their, going deep in here, their supply is dropping. Again, supply's another video, but that's another thing to keep in mind, because supply affects speed, attacking, defense, breakthrough. It's all very important. So that's something also to keep in mind with. But alright, so they're pushing through, and they are just crushing anything in their way. My infantry divisions are slowly starting to move in, but look at these guys go. We are going to make it very difficult for them to have an adequate response because they didn't respond in time. Alright, let's split this up a little bit, give ourselves some breathing room. And here they go. And they're moving fast. In general, faster than they can. Now, we got a couple divisions trying to come back and cut them off, but that's just not going to work for them. They're in trouble. If I was being smart, I would go for Warsaw first, because that's their big supply capital. That would supply everyone on this side. They have to fall back to a better defensive line. But we're not worried about that. This is all just showing off how awesome tanks can be when used correctly. Especially on Reddit, some of the worst things I see are people who just don't understand the supply system or the train system, and therefore think that, oh, my tanks aren't doing well because tanks are bad. They're not bad. They're just very situation specific, and if you're smart and understand how they work, you can use them and absolutely annihilate anything in your way. If you're not, you are going to put a lot of industry value into something that just doesn't work. But alright, as you can see, we are exploiting the gap now. We have already have troops attacking Warsaw. We got infantry division here cleaning up this area. And now, looking at this, all of these guys are now suddenly losing supply, and that's awesome. That makes, if I chose to attack with this infantry, they're fighting a lot easier. And so, I don't know, I've said it before, it's just really important to understand how all these systems tie together, because that informs what is a smart attack. Now, if we really wanted to get a little crazy here, let's just cut these guys off. And we're going to pocket this entire group here. Now, let's use these guys to hold them in place. It is okay to attack divisions that you don't think you're going to win the battle, as long as it's to, slow down the enemy. But as you can see, this is going incredibly well. We have been doing this for, what, a week? And we are approaching the capital of Warsaw. These guys, we have infantry flooding into this area here. And our tanks are about to complete their breakthrough and encircle half of the Polish army in a week. That's awesome. That is exactly what you want to see when using tanks, because the longer they're in battle, the more problems you're going to have, especially when it comes to making sure they get their, making sure that they're able to continuously fight is a very expensive industry thing. There are strategies where people just don't use tanks, and they just throw out as many men as they can. Russia is a great example of that. Some of my favorite Soviet Union playthroughs are I spam guns and guns only, and I end up with something like 1,500 divisions. And unless you have some really great air support and tanks, you're just not going to be able to break through their lines, and you're just going to wear yourself down fighting against them, because Russia always has more guns than men. But right, this entire army, this entire group here is now encircled. At the same time, we are attacking Warsaw, and if you're a Polish player at this point, this is a disaster. You are going to lose the campaign. It is now just a matter of time. Meanwhile, the tanks are now reorganizing to push down this way and over here. And that's also very important to do. It's very rarely, unless, you know, you're very low on fuel, which tanks use a lot of fuel. That's something to keep in mind. Having a massive, massive, massive tank army is going to cripple your fuel industry, especially if you're the Axis. If you're the Soviet Union, I mean, look how much fuel they got. I mean, they're just fine. They're second only to America, you know. Like, we're over in America, you know, 614, 346. Yeah, I mean, America is like, you know, oil capital of the world in this game. They also steal some from Mexico because, you know, America. But so tanks do use fuel, and fuel have, it takes a while to learn. A great way to avoid that, though, is trade, or if you have the industry capacity to build these synthetic refineries because they give you extra fuel. But right, so Polish armies encircled. They're being pushed back at Warsaw. Tanks are reorganizing. You'll notice I still don't have great supply, and that's because opening the supply tab, we actually don't have a railroad to them. So the next step would be to probably secure the supply lines, which I could do several ways. I could take this province here that connects these railroads here, although that doesn't actually connect all the way there. I could close this Danzig pocket, and that'll do that. Or I could punch through to the south here, take Katowice, secure this rail line, and I'll have the ability to get supply in there. But that's, again, supply is going to be its own video someday. But that is kind of it. That's the big things tank do. Keep in mind, you know, they are a massive industry cost, and let's just do a quick comparison. So the light tanks that the game comes up with have a 6.6 and 5.6 industry cost, while the medium tanks have 11.7 for each. So you could build 2 light tanks for each medium tank, or actually, it turns out these are more expensive than I thought they were. Okay, so tanks are less expensive than planes. I have to work that in sometime. But let's compare it to infantry equipment, which is a 0.5. So you could produce 10 infantry equipment to 1 tank. And keep in mind, with divisions like these, which are not great, this is not a great tank division. A great tank division is looks a bit more like this. Yeah, these are okay stats. I usually stick with combat with 20. It's a good even number to work with. But if you know where you're going to fight and know what you want to use them for, you could do something like this. I'm actually going to give it 1 more tank. And probably add some support artillery. And boom. Now their HP is up by 35. Their org dropped a little bit, but like that soft tack is up 50%. Their defense is up a little bit, but their breakthrough is doubled. Their armor goes up a bit because more tanks equals more armor. Their piercing's fine. But this is a very solid division, I'd say. But it costs 540 tanks. And that's quite a heavy cost. Whereas this infantry division only needs 910 infantry equipment, and it's still pretty good division. I prefer 20 with infantry divisions for now, unless I know what I'm fighting, and then at that case I can specialize where it's supposed to go. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I am planning to do a playthrough series. As much as I love tutorial videos and how they can help people, and as I said before, the best way to learn this game is by actually playing it or watching people play it, and so I think doing a multi-part tutorial series would help players understand the game a bit more, because then you see the thought process that goes into decision making. If things go wrong, I can walk people through what I did wrong, hopefully, all that good stuff. So yeah, thanks for watching this video, guys. Leave a comment and a like if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.